and welcome to my video series covering the story arcs of Star Wars The Clone Wars. In this video, we will be covering the two-part story, The Lost Droid. Anakin and his clone forces are stationed at Bofawai. Obi-Wan informs Anakin and Ahsoka via hologram of their recent losses and that General Grievous will be there soon. Obi-Wan advises they flee, but Anakin won't leave and let the Separatists take the system. Despite Ahsoka also agreeing with Obi-Wan, Anakin decides to stay and fight anyway, with him having a plan to counter Grievous. Grievous arrives and takes his fleet through the asteroid field, using them as a protection barrier. As they advance, they begin to fire on Anakin's fleet, with them being led right into Anakin's trap. As the majority of Anakin's forces retreat, Anakin continues to advance towards Grievous. With Grievous's fleet in position, the trap is revealed. Anakin has ATTEs stationed on the asteroids behind Grievous's fleet. Headed by Captain Rex, they have outflanked Grievous. Grievous is angered at the situation, while Anakin marvels in its apparent easiness. As Grievous flees his ship, Anakin takes chase, while Ahsoka makes sure the Resolute takes out his remaining forces. While Grievous is able to escape, Anakin's fighter is badly damaged. Anakin is woken up by a medical droid, with Ahsoka and Rex being present too. While Grievous escaped, his fleet was destroyed, but R2 is also gone. Communicating with Obi-Wan, Anakin is depressed after losing R2. Obi-Wan suggests getting a new astromech, but Anakin, not losing hope, wants to return to the scene of the battle and locate his missing droid. Obi-Wan reprimands Anakin for not erasing R2's memory, having to reluctantly let him rescue the droid to prevent Secret Republic information getting into Separatist hands. As Ahsoka and Anakin prepare the Twilight for departure, Ahsoka introduces Anakin to their new astromech, R3-S6. Anakin is not impressed. No one can replace R2. Anakin locates his Jedi starfighter, but R2 is missing. Ahsoka checks the scanners and notices a scavenger ship. The pair board the ship. Anakin inquires with the Trandoshan scavenger as to whether he has picked up an R-series recently, with the Trandoshan stating he hasn't, though he will let them look inside his cargo hold. As the pair navigate the cargo hold, they encounter a few assassin droids. Anakin hears R2 and informs R3 to open one of the ship's doors. He activates the assassin droids instead. Anakin and Ahsoka are forced to deal with the droids as Ahsoka compliments Anakin on suggesting practical experience. Anakin is annoyed at R3 for not being able to perform a simple task. Anakin threatens the scavenger Gnact into revealing where R2 is before Ahsoka stops him, and they leave. In return for this, Gnact contacts General Grievous, revealing he does in fact have R2. Back on the Resolute, Anakin and Ahsoka, along with a holographic Obi-Wan, assume that R2 was destroyed in battle. The three discuss how Grievous is intercepting their transmissions and must have a secret listening post. Obi-Wan tasks Anakin with finding the listening post and destroying it. Back on the scavenger ship, R2 removes his restraining bolt. Roaming free throughout the ship, he is chased by an assassin droid. R2 outsmarts the droid and ejects it out of an airlock. Unfortunately, Gnact notices this. As Anakin and R3 exit hyperspace, R3 activates his tracking beacon, revealing his location to an expecting Grievous. Grievous's fleet fires upon Anakin. R3 continues to misbehave, dropping the hyperspeed ring. Grievous demands all their firepower be focused on the fleeing Jedi fighter. Ahsoka and Rex arrive in the Twilight and give Anakin some cover as he stumbles his way into the Twilight's cargo hold. Ahsoka performs a foolhardy maneuver as they fly right in between Grievous's ships, scraping the edges of the Twilight in a near miss. On the bridge of the Twilight, Anakin yet again is angry at R3 for his inability to perform the right actions. Anakin knows R2 is still out there and he will find him. Gnact makes his way to Grievous's location, while R2 attempts to send a distress call. Having received the call, Anakin, Ahsoka and Rex track R2's location. Ganact arrives at Skytop Station and delivers R2 to General Grievous, who orders his dissection. As the Jedi detect the Separatist listening post, they contact Obi-Wan to notify him. Obi-Wan wants to send cruisers, but they inform him of R2-D2's presence. Not having enough time for backup, Obi-Wan lets them carry out their mission, but reminds them that this is not a rescue. The Jedi and clones skydive from the twilight, Ahsoka going first, followed by Anakin and the clones, who are unnoticed by droids manning the station. Ganact discovers all of the Republic data on R2 and informs Grievous. Ganact tries to bargain more than his existing fee, but instead, Grievous gives him the bonus of death. R3 reports in with Grievous, informing him of the Jedi's presence on the base. Grievous tells R3 to delay them while he's busy. Ahsoka wonders where Goldie has got to, while Grievous gets his Magna Guard to secure R2. Rex informs the others that the reactor room has been ray-shielded, with Ahsoka encouraging R3 to disable the shields. R3 deliberately stalls so that the battle droids can arrive and engage into conflict with Ahsoka and the clones. As more battle droids arrive, the clones bring out the droid poppers, electronically disabling the droids. Grievous informs the Magna Guard to pack up and move R2, while he encounters Ahsoka, whom he regards as a child and thus assumes the Republic are running out of Jedi. Ahsoka and Grievous commence into a duel, but he easily overpowers her and the clones, almost killing Rex, where Ahsoka recovers just before he can make a fatal blow. While Ahsoka flees as Grievous begins to hunt her like prey, Anakin encounters the Magna Guards transporting R2 and intercepts them. Ahsoka, despite Rex's protests, decides to keep General Grievous occupied as Rex sets the explosive charges with the other last remaining clone. Anakin fights the Magna Guards as R2 reassembles himself and shocks the final one that's still active. R2 is annoyed at being replaced with R3. Ahsoka listens in on Grievous and discovers that R3 is a traitor. Anakin reaches the station's hangar, with Rex arriving soon after and informing him of Ahsoka's engagement with Grievous. Anakin is worried but is unable to do anything when R3 appears, traps them in the hangar, and activates the Vulture droids. Grievous finds Ahsoka and threatens that Anakin will be next after he has dealt with her. Rex detonates the explosives he planted in the station's reactor, causing a brief distraction which allows Ahsoka to escape. R2 has to locate an external access panel to be able to override R3's lock on the hangar door. Grievous once again flees before all hell breaks loose, while R2 and R3 face off against each other on the station's walkway. Ahsoka rejoins the others in the hangar as they defend themselves against the oncoming battle droid forces. Rex uses fuel cells to quickly make scrap metal of the droids. As R2 and R3 continue to duel on the walkway, the Twilight leaves the hangar, with Anakin getting into his Jedi Starfighter to rescue R2 once again. R3 tries to use R2 to grip onto as the station falls, but R2 using his own buzzsaw cuts the wire and R3 falls off the platform and gets dismantled by oncoming debris. Before the same can happen to R2, however, Anakin shows up just in the nick of time and saves him. Later on, Anakin converses with Obi-Wan over hologram, who gets annoyed at his recklessness, but Anakin defends his decisions by stating how R2 was the one who found the listening station. Obi-Wan, clearly frustrated, ends the call. Ahsoka, while being glad they have R2 back, can also see Obi-Wan's side of the argument, but to Anakin, R2 isn't just a droid, he's a friend. The 2 episodes in production order are as followed: CW102, Downfall of a Droid, and CW106, Duel of the Droids. As with every episode in the original production of The Clone Wars, this story arc was executive produced by George Lucas, with Dave Filoni being the supervising director. Downfall of a Droid was written by George Krstic, with Henry Gilroy as story editor, while Duel of the Droids was written by Kevin Campbell and Henry Gilroy. Both episodes were directed by Rob Coleman. Downfall of a Droid was released as Season 1 Episode 6 on November 7th, 2008, while its story concluding sequel episode was released a week later on November 14th, 2008 as Season 1 Episode 7. Trust in your friends and they'll have reason to trust in you. An earlier version of this fortune cookie was, friends are hard to find, difficult to leave, impossible to forget. Downfall of a Droid was the first episode produced for the Clone Wars that wasn't combined into the Clone Wars movie release, being the second episode produced for the series as a whole. You can tell this by its early production code, as well as the fact that some of the scenes from Downfall of a Droid look more rough around the edges compared to later produced episodes. This is especially noticeable in scenes around the opening battle and when Anakin is in the medical bay. Downfall of a Droid's newsreel has some specifically created shots for it, showing a sequence of clones and droids battling in a hallway, a shot of Grievous, some space battle sequences, a shot of Anakin deflecting some blaster bolts from some B-2 battle droids, and 2 clone shinies carrying one of their brothers. These sequences depict a more saturated and bloomy visual style that select scenes of these earlier produced episodes had. Tom Kane's narration within the newsreel is also notably less upbeat than his later vocal performances, with this most likely being before he finalised his vocal tone for them. Due to being produced before CW118 The New Padawan, Downfall of a Droid's opening theme is the earlier, less orchestral iteration. The designs for this episode date its design phase to early 2006. The started sequence from Downfall of a Droid was cut short in the final version of the episode, with there being an entire sequence of Anakin tinkering his Jedi Delta 7B starfighter with R2-D2 in the Resolute's hangar bay, where R2 gets his own back against the droid Treadwell. This is before Ahsoka enters the hangar and informs Anakin they have an urgent transmission on the bridge. This sequence must have been a late cut because not only is it pretty much fully animated, but it was also shared on the Clone Wars movie Blu-ray release as promotional material for the upcoming first season of the show. A few voice lines were also cut from the episode, including Ahsoka asking if someone called for help again during the Vulture Droid battle sequence, as well as at the end of the episode with an additional line of Anakin stating that he's going to find R2. During the hologram sequence with Obi-Wan, Rex is missing his camera. This also happens again during the ATT asteroid sequence. Obi-Wan uses the phrase "dime a dozen," which confirms that the concept of a dime exists within the Star Wars universe, this most likely meaning a tenth of a credit, with there also having been a previously established Star Wars version of this, that being Desecred. There are regular clone shinies in the position of clone officers in this episode. This is most likely due to the limited amount of models they were able to create at this point in the show's development. Also, Admiral Yularen is not featured either, despite him being present on the Resolute in episodes produced after this, potentially suggesting that Yularen was added into the show with CW103 Castle of Doom, and then included in additional scenes when CW118 The New Padawan was adapted into the first part of the Clone Wars movie. Ahsoka's tactical screen has an Aurebesh Easter egg relating to the episode's opening battle sequence with the phrase ATT rules, as well as text stating "Take that, Grievous." The former Easter egg would be used again for the later produced episode Rookies, which was aired before this episode, when the episodic order was shifted around for the first season's debut on Cartoon Network. The battle sequence features techno-esque music. This type of music was originally planned to feature frequently within Clone Wars' space battle sequences, but by the time of the Clone Wars movie release, it was decided to drop this approach, with the music being cut from the final version of the Clone Wars movie. Ahsoka references a Mynock during the battle. Anakin stated to R2, "Good thing you gave us the extra power," seems to be a reference to the deleted scene from before, with it potentially being something that could confuse people without knowledge of said scene. Early test footage for the space battle sequence depicts Rex with a standard clone shiny model, but with a recolored blue visor and blue shoulder pauldrons. The space battle allowed the production team the opportunity to depict a capital ship and starfighter battle sequence within an asteroid field. something Star Wars hadn't yet done, which was an interesting feat for them to accomplish with the limited assets they had, leading to them deciding to use the ATT tanks in space. We get our first instance of this episode's droid comedy when Grievous leaps the bridge and the droid deduces that he's the one in charge now. Anakin gets incredibly close to seeing Grievous during their starfighter skirmish, showing that they were pushing the continuity to the limits, even in the first episode with them both in, despite the show making sure they never directly meet face to face. The implication of Grievous never meeting Obi-Wan before when he tells him on Utapau that he's trained by Count Dooku isn't kept within the show as they meet many times. Anakin getting super close to meeting Grievous in person sort of becomes a reoccurring gag throughout the show, and even into the unfinished Crystal Crisis on Utapau story arc. This episode focused on Anakin's attachment issues, particularly with R2-D2, whom George Lucas has described as sort of the family dog. The Ahsoka-isms continue, with Ahsoka having a nickname for Rex, Rexter, and also later on when she calls R3, Goldie. Ahsoka's observation of the difference between Anakin and Obi-Wan has her deciphering which one of them is right within this situation, with her ultimately coming to support Anakin. The ship debris field above Boffelwai contains a wrecked Acclamator-class assault ship, which did not feature in the depicted battle. R3's gold and black colour scheme is a homage to Dave Filoni's hometown favourites, the Pittsburgh Steelers. While the Twilight was designed for CW101 Castle of Deception, as stated on the Twilight Bees design sheet from CW503 The Lawless, it actually made its first appearance production-wise within CW102 Downfall of a Droid, which explains why a 3D model of it is featured within the bonus features on the Clone Wars Season 1 Blu-ray instead of the movie release, with this practice being done for a bunch of the movie's behind-the-scenes content, which is spaced out between the 3 discs of the first season. This 3D model view shows us parts of the interior that would be rarely if at all seen within the show, the place where Rotta is given medicine, which also contains 3 stacked beds, as well as the rear cargo hold, used for a deleted sequence from the movie. The Twilight, while not confirmed to be, could be residue from the original idea of the Clone Wars, where it could have been the home base ship of the original crew, like the Ghost from Rebels. The Twilight design itself is another repurposed, unused Revenge of the Sith design. Anakin flying the Twilight, which is described as a spice freighter, is a deliberate nod to A New Hope, where Luke thinks his father flew one during the Clone Wars. After Anakin crashed it on Tatooine in CW104 Castle of Salvation, he dug it out and has got a little attached to it, like he has with R2-D2 within this story arc. Obi-Wan is convinced for him to keep it though, because it isn't a Republic marked ship, so they can use it to sneak behind enemy lines. As Ganact introduces himself to Anakin and Ahsoka, the episode depicts the usage of toilet humour via a fart gag. A similar type of humour was also featured within a deleted scene of CW101 Castle of Deception, with Rotta the Hutt being sick. This is something the sound team decided to do for the episode, adding an extra layer to Ganac's character. As Anakin and Ahsoka make their way through the cargo hold, we see a shot of a deactivated protocol droid. This protocol droid is clearly a repurposed use of C-3PO's model, with it even having the exact same colour scheme. As the assassin droids begin to climb the shelving within the cargo hold, the one that had its arm cut off by Anakin has its arm reappear attached in later shots. When Grievous talks to Ganact over hologram, his model has his hands in their default position. Ganact is voiced by Rob Coleman, with him being one of the earliest known Clone Wars guest voice actors, with his design itself being a deliberate choice to make his face asymmetrical, with this being a physical representation of his two-faced corrupt persona. Ganac's character model created during the production of this episode will be reused in the later produced CW104 Castle of Salvation, being an extra featured within Zero the Hutt's palace. Whether this is actually Ganact or not hasn't been confirmed, but could be him due to Castle of Salvation chronologically taking place before this episode. Ganac's starship is called the Vulture's Claw, which went through a few design options before landing on one that was chosen based on its dump truck paint job, despite the actual design for it being created separate from that idea. The seat design was also inspired by the Millennium Falcons. Anakin's Jedi Starfighter gets fixed quite quickly, though there is probably a bit of a time jump between when Anakin and Ahsoka leave the Vulture's claw and the following scenes with them. Another humorous droid comedy moment comes when one of the droids states Anakin is only one fighter and he can't escape, with Grievous knowing all too well about Anakin's reputation and demanding they put all their firepower on him. There is a close-up shot of Anakin that has been flipped, with his scar and hair parting being on the opposite side. Despite the first hyperspace jump being stated to have been featured in CW103 Castle of Doom, a small quick shot of one is also used in CW102 Downfall of a Droid. It's always possible, however, that this was created after the one done in CW103, though the visuals of that one have been improved compared to the one featured in this episode. In the sequence on board the Twilight near the end of the episode, where Anakin reprimands R3, you can notice the black part of his tunic has disappeared, showing the brown layer underneath. Downfall of a Droid, despite being one of the episodes produced before CW118, contains the newer, more orchestral iteration of the end credits theme. While the official chronological order guide places this story after the Malevolence arc, it actively ignores a reference made to Ahsoka's flying by Anakin from Downfall of a Droid. Due to this corrected placement, this makes this story arc the first time General Grievous fully appears within the Clone Wars, considering he was only briefly featured in the movie via a brief villain showcase set piece in the Clone Wars movie intro. The Tales of the Clone Wars webcomic tie-in for this episode was titled The Clone Wars: The Fall of Feline, with this depicting the events that Obi-Wan mentions at the beginning of the episode. The Clone Wars novel Wild Space is set concurrently with the events of Downfall of a Droid and depicts a retelling of several scenes from the episode within it, with the author of the novel, Karen Miller, being given the episode scripts to get a feel for the characters. You hold onto friends by keeping your heart a little softer than your head. Duel of the Droids is the 6th episode produced within the first production season of the show. As with Downfall of a Droid, Duel of the Droids contains the older, less orchestral iteration of the Clone Wars intro theme tune. This episode was the 3rd episode produced for the show that was not combined into the Clone Wars movie release, with the following released episode, Bombad Jedi, released as Season 1 Episode 8, being the previous production episode, CW 105. The designs for this episode placed the design phase from early to mid 2006. You can already see a significant visual improvement in the shadow depth throughout CW106 compared to CW102, with the latter plus the initial work on CW103, CW104 and CW105 no doubt given the production teams more experience with how to hone this visual style and usage of said shadows more effectively. Ganak's elongated fingernails, notably seen at the start of this episode, kind of look like acrylic nails. Ahsoka not being able to recognise R2's voice over the scanner could be due to this still being quite early in her Master Padawanship with Anakin. While there has indeed been a time gap since Castle of Salvation, considering the Twilight's recovery and repair, it's probably not that long. Plus we know from later episodes that Ahsoka has separate activities from Anakin, and thus might have interacted with other similar sounding astromechs, as well as potentially not having had any other adventures with R2 between Castle of Salvation and this story arc. A brief additional sequence of Anakin ordering Ahsoka to get going was present in the Cartoon Network version of the episode, but cut from the physical media release. The design of Skytop Station is the centre ball of a Trade Federation ship, with a lot of additional dishes and antenna added to it. The interior design was just a reused singular corridor asset, resembling the Trade Federation ship interior from the Phantom Menace, with the storage room being designed specifically for this episode. The hangar was created to be a reusable asset throughout different Separatist locations, with the fight sequence within being a set piece inspired by the Star Wars movies. Skytop Station is located within the atmosphere of one of Ruson's moons. Ruson was an important world within the old expanded universe, where an ancient battle between the Jedi and Sith took place. A case of the droid comedy happens when one B1 battle droid tells another to carry something and not drop it, with us all knowing that he'll drop it shortly afterwards, which he ends up doing to our amusement. Said droid who tells the other to not drop it continues to say the droid who dropped it is not the brightest light on the ship, while clearly not noticing the many skydiving clones and the 2 Jedi behind them. Skytop Station featured a few Aquilish data analyzers, one of which tries to hide its data stream from a passing R2-D2. These Aquilish are a reference to the Hypercommunications Cartel, this being another non-droid-led separatist-aligned organisation like the Trade Federation and Techno Union, though of course they play coy and pretend to act neutral to benefit themselves. Though, unlike those two, the Hypercommunication Cartel's leader, Poe Nudo, is never featured within any finished episode of the show. I assume that these Aquilish individuals most likely perished during the destruction of Skytop Station at the end of the episode. R2's data screens have Aurebesh that don't actually translate to anything, with this thus being purely for display purposes, containing no Easter eggs with hidden details. Anakin never directly meeting Grievous as established from Revenge of the Sith is further kept within this episode, instead using the opportunity to put Ahsoka in an out of her depth situation when she comes up against Grievous. Dave Filoni says it was a challenge to make sure Anakin and Grievous don't meet each other due to both of them being big figures within the Clone Wars, and a duel between Anakin and Grievous is something he personally wished he could see. The closest they could do was have the characters be right near each other, but not directly notice or interact with each other, like ships passing in the night. George Lucas specifically said that Ahsoka as a Padawan would not be afraid of General Grievous, with her small size being used as an advantage to move quickly. While of course she can't beat him, she's got some level of training to put up somewhat of a fight. The Ahsoka-isms continue when Ahsoka calls R3 a quote, stubby little backstabber. It was very important to make sure to show that Grievous was able to get the upper hand on Ahsoka at some point within the story, with Ahsoka only being able to escape the fight, not win it. Ahsoka, without Anakin being there, is focusing on buying time and survival. Another element to suggest that this story arc is set before Shadow of Malevolence is how Ahsoka acts like she fully knows how despicable Grievous is in that episode, which would make more sense, in my opinion, to come after he has tried to kill her in Duel of the Droids. Grievous's cough is particularly noticeable just before he begins to duel Ahsoka. This would suggest that his cough is potentially now a side effect of the level of intensity his cybernetics have put on his actual body, instead of being because Mace Windu crushed his chestplate during the Battle of Coruscant, as of course, this episode takes place way before those events. The cough clearly becoming something that was decided come development of this version of the Clone Wars to become part of his actual character instead of something that happened to him just before Revenge of the Sith, with the Clone Wars having the final version of Revenge of the Sith to relate back to, while the Clone Wars 2003 didn't, as both it and Revenge of the Sith were in development at the same time. The other clone that survives with Rex is called Denau. He would appear in one more episode within the Clone Wars' first production season, where he would unfortunately meet his demise at the hands of a certain notorious bounty hunter. Seen within Skytop Station's hangar are Magna Guard starfighters, which were previously used in CW-104, Castle of Salvation. The production team, knowing about all of R2's gadgets and gizmos, wanted to put him into a situation where he would battle another astromech. Killian Plunkett describes R2's colour scheme as a sort of superhero outfit, with him also making sure that R2's gadgets are located in the correct compartments on his design. Killian also describes the Clone Wars iteration of R2 as more of a Swiss Army knife compared to the live-action movies, due to all 6 of those movies having been finished and released, allowing them to use all of the movies as reference material to combine all of R2's abilities. R3 is described by Henry Gilroy as R2's evil twin, with Dave Filoni describing R3's different sound effects as off-kilter. Originally, Henry Gilroy had the battle between R2 and R3 be about 3 pages worth of script, with them having a variety of locations and action moves, but by the final production, it was cut right down to what we see in the finished episode. The scene of Grievous fleeing Skytop Station was reused within CW111, Destroy Malevolence. This could explain why his hand reappears after being cut off by Ahsoka in a previous scene. Luckily, the clone who was piloting the Twilight survives the hangar battle. The shot of Skytop Station as it's falling has a radar dish positioned in such a way that it is reminiscent of the first Death Star. As with CW102 Downfall of a Droid, CW106 Duel of the Droids has had its end credits theme updated with the more orchestral post-Clone Wars movie version of the theme tune. The Tales of the Clone Wars webcomic tie-in for this episode was titled The Clone Wars Discount. This 2-part story arc is an interesting look into Anakin's attachment issues and the problems they can cause, with Anakin's attachment to R2 potentially giving the Separatists an upper hand due to him not erasing R2's memory. This story also suggests that Grievous also must know of Anakin's attachment issues and knew that R2 has valuable information that could help the Separatists in their war against the Republic. Anakin's attachment isn't just limited to R2, but also extends to him having kept the Twilight. The opening sequence depicts how Obi-Wan and Ahsoka are more in tune with the Jedi teachings, due to them having been brought into the temple at a young age, while Anakin's unique backstory of coming in later has him thinking differently. He wants to stay and protect the system so more people don't suffer at Separatist hands, while both Obi-Wan and Ahsoka think it's better for them to cut their losses and regroup. R2-D2 is described by Henry Gilroy as Anakin's right-hand man, with the deleted sequence showing us just that, and essentially being the calm before the storm moment for these 2 characters before the main premise of the 2 characters being separated. I think it is a shame that the sequence was removed from the final version of Downfall of a Droid, as it's a perfect contrast to the later scenes with R3-S6. The scene in the medical bay I think is probably the sequence I think looks the worst in the entire show. There is just way too much bloom in it, to the point where the characters' faces start to blend in with the objects behind them. The lighting concepts done for this episode by Fang Lee have a shot from this sequence that looks so much better than what the final episode ended up looking. Maybe their intention was to make it look that way, because Anakin has just been unconscious for a while and they wanted to depict the scene as if it was from his vision of everything being kind of blurry and overly bright, due to the head injuries he would have sustained. There is also a lighting concept for a scene with R3 and a hologram of General Grievous, potentially hinting at a cut sequence directly revealing R3's treachery earlier in the story. However, there is a similar scene from CW106, Duel of the Droids, but this is flipped to have R3 on the opposite side of the screen, as well as it having a different background, so it's still possible that it was a cut sequence from CW102. It would explain how General Grievous has a sudden expectation of a Jedi tracking beacon within the finished episode, as he could have been informed by R3 during this scene of the Jedi's actions to find his listening station. R2's loyalty is shown on full force with his consistent persistence to try and escape his situation and reunite with Anakin. Anakin returns this loyalty by not giving up hope for the droid even when everyone else seems to, with Anakin being offended that Ahsoka replaced R2 with the new R3 unit due to his attachment of R2, which, as Obi-Wan says, goes against the Jedi way. The glimmer of hope Anakin has when he prepares to find R2 reminds me of the tragedy of this character, where he eventually ends up, and how it has you lament on how someone like this, who cares so much, can fall so far down a path that leads to the deaths of so many others, with the attachments he has being a blessing and a curse in the end. I think it's a shame that the Twilight's interior rooms wasn't used more often when it feels like it was potentially made to be more like the Ghost in Star Wars Rebels. They could have perhaps had a storyline where Anakin and Ahsoka had to spend several days within the Twilight and away from the temple and front lines for some reason. This could have utilised the beds within. Ahsoka mentions the Jedi texts again, with Anakin saying they only give you part of the picture. This again pointing out their book smarts versus practical experience dynamic. Ahsoka has quite a few facial expressions within this story arc, something you may not notice on first watch. It's also something that unfortunately reminds me of how Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka seems way more reserved in comparison, though of course Ahsoka in this story is a teen, and the Ahsoka in her live action show is of a much more experienced older Ahsoka who is given the direction of someone who's been through a lot and hasn't yet fully come to terms with that. I hope the second season of Ahsoka has her come more out of her shell now that she's made peace with her past and allows her to return to the more optimistic version of herself that has hope for the future. I think if R3 hadn't been a traitor, his whole stick of having more errors than R2 could have been a funny joke of how new technology that is stated to be better than the old have more errors, with people having more attachment to their older pieces of tech that has become consistently reliable to them. Though, having R3 being one of Grievous's spies does make sense, as they would be able to easily infiltrate the Republic with astromech droids due to their high volume of usage with Jedi generals. R2 ejecting the assassin droid out of an airlock reminds me of something Chopper from Star Wars Rebels would do. This also adds up with R2 roasting the droid Treadwell with Anakin's starfighter engines in the deleted scene. The first instance of R3 being a traitor is revealed when he activates the tracking beacon on Anakin's Jedi starfighter, with General Grievous clearly expecting this to happen. The previous instances of R3's behaviour could have been written off as him either being a faulty droid or a droid who dislikes Anakin for some reason. Here we have it being more obvious that he's one of Grievous's spies. Duel of the Droids shows us a look at Rex's disdain for droids, with him questioning the inclusion of R3 in their infiltration mission and being lumped with the duty of carrying him. Rex obviously has a negative bias towards droids, considering his origin of being a clone soldier created to fight them. This is something I think would have no doubt come up within his unfinished Clone Wars arc with R2, where the both of them get stranded on a Ryloth moon and reprogram a B2 battle droid. This being one of the lesser talked about unfinished story arcs out of the show's unfinished 40 episodes that I often wonder a lot about, due to the limited information that's been confirmed about it, and as I go through these earlier and finished Clone Wars episodes, we'll continue to think of ways how the unfinished episodes could have related back to them. Ahsoka's enthusiasm is on full force when she proudly exclaims for the clones to follow her and is the first one to skydive from the Twilight. Rex's disdain for R3 continues when Ahsoka gets him to open the door, with this particular situation making the viewer side with Rex, considering R3's past failures. Ahsoka becomes the last individual to have trust in the droid, with her being a bit naive, but also having some youthful hope in others that her more experienced seniors, like Anakin and Rex, might not have due to their own biases. Grievous encountering Ahsoka and regarding her as a child is kind of mirrored by the Siege of Mandalore depicting Ahsoka as the one to encounter Maul. Both times, they do not expect Ahsoka, instead expecting a more seasoned Jedi. Ahsoka stating that they were all fooled, with Anakin's expression being like, "Really, Ahsoka?" is as closest as we'll get to her admitting she was the one in the wrong. The animators enjoyed getting to work with R2, which would have most likely continued throughout all of his future Clone Wars story arcs, and probably would have included his unfinished arc with Rex too, had the show not been cancelled. R3's sound effects give off a vibe that he is whistling to himself, which by Duel of the Droids, when it's become 100% apparent he wants to kill the Jedi and the clones, comes off as quite unnerving. It personally reminds me of a villain from another TV show, that being of Negan from The Walking Dead, who also would whistle to taunt his enemies. The brief appearance of the hypercommunications cartel within this story arc makes me wonder if they would have potentially appeared within an unfinished story arc of the show, considering how it's possible that the Separatist Council would have appeared within Padme's final story arc. I could see at least Poe Nudo making a cameo appearance, with them repurposing an existing Aqualesh model. The way the live-action movies are described within Duel of the Droids development featurette definitely comes off as if the Star Wars movies are complete, with this being a time when not only did Lucas seem to not want to do a sequel trilogy, but also when they were still trying to get the live-action Star Wars TV show, codenamed Underworld, off the ground. Overall, I think this early story arc has a good representation of Anakin's attachment issues, both with them causing problems, with R2 having information that should have been erased, and them also solving said problems when Anakin's attachment to R2 works in their favour in being able to find the Separatist listening post and revealing R3 as a spy. Ahsoka's loyalty to Anakin is also a key factor in the arc. She's there to support him and keep him in check, making sure he doesn't go too far, like when he threatens Ganact. That situation in particular reminds me of a similar situation that was featured within Doctor Who around a year after this arc aired, where like Anakin, the Doctor goes too far, but unlike Anakin, he doesn't have anyone there to stop him like Anakin does with Ahsoka, causing worse repercussions from his actions that he later regrets. Obi-Wan, just like in the kidnapped Tutlet story arc from the movie, has a supporting role, only popping into the story via hologram to check up on the ongoing situation and to make sure everything is in check, with him having to remind Anakin of Jedi not having attachments. While I think Downfall of a Droid is the one episode that could definitively do with a hypothetical special edition to improve some of its visual shortcomings, I can look past Lucasfilm Animation's early visual work here to see the story underneath, which I'd say is still quite enjoyable for me, even after I've seen it several times. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and comment. Until the next time, goodbye.